The gala shimmered with chandeliers and champagne until a sound split the evening's gloss. A woman's voice, sharp as glass, ordering children to kneel. Conversations died mid-laughter. Crystal stems trembled. Every head turned toward the ceiling speakers that now carried the cruelty of a private home. Guests froze, breath shallow, as recognition rippled through the hall. That voice belonged to the award recipient standing on stage, hands gripping the podium, her smile collapsing into horror. The orchestra stilled. Screens behind her, meant to display charity figures, now flickered with a dimly lit room, 3 children sobbing in silence. Gasps erupted. Phones lifted. The glittering elite of Boston watched benevolence unravel in real time. At the edge of the crowd, a single man in a black tuxedo didn't move. His eyes burned toward the stage. The billionaire's world had cracked open under chandeliers, and the truth was now public property. Daniel Whitaker's expression held the paralysis of a man recognizing his own ruin. Light from the projectors carved deep furrows into his face, catching the sweat along his temple. Around him, murmurs grew, a tide of disbelief crawling through sequined gowns and tailored suits. He felt every whisper puncture him like a pin. His name, his wife's disgrace, his children's screams immortalized in pixels. Cameras swung his way. Reporters smelled blood and reputation. He didn't blink. Beneath the tuxedo, muscles locked, not from shame alone, but from calculation. He had planned this unveiling, yet even preparation couldn't numb the sting of witnessing humanity recoil from him. Each flicker of the footage stabbed like memory reborn. The empire he built on trust and steel now trembled in the air-conditioned hush. Beside him, champagne spilled unnoticed onto marble, spreading a golden stain, an echo of a corridor he once thought safe.
Whispers fanned outward, synchronized like wind through reeds. Faces leaned together, the privileged dissecting downfall in real time. "Isn't that Vanessa Drake?" someone mouthed. "The foundation chair?" another gasped. The ballroom's perfection fractured into voyeuristic awe. Donors who once signed checks under her charm now shielded eyes from the evidence looping behind the stage. Waiters froze mid-step, balancing silver trays trembling under weightless glasses. Photographers' flashes flared without rhythm, desperate to trap scandal in digital amber. A charity meant for abused children had become a mirror of abuse itself. In the ripple of judgment, Daniel heard the machinery of reputation devour its own. Each murmur grew heavier, each heartbeat louder. He remembered board meetings where applause drowned conscience and realized how fragile applause truly was. Somewhere inside him, a buried fury stirred, not at their stares, but at himself, for letting illusion grow this monstrous before the light finally found it. On the screen, Vanessa's frozen image hovered, her elegant posture unraveling frame by frame. The camera had caught the precise instant when pride curdled into fear. Her jeweled hand hovered near her throat as if she could claw back the sound now haunting the ballroom. No one spoke, even air seemed to retreat. Time fractured into a photograph of humiliation. Guests watched the charity queen's crown dissolve into pixels of cruelty. Daniel's mind split between pity and justice. This was the woman society worshipped, the one who lectured on virtue while breaking spirits behind locked doors. The projection flickered again, static hissing like applause from another realm. In that ghostly noise, Daniel heard the house where it began, the golden corridor, the whisper to stay silent, the bouquet of lilies crushed underfoot. Everything led here, this single still frame where power and deceit froze under relentless light and the masquerade ended.
Light fractures fade to darkness. The screen's afterglow melts into the hush before memory. 2 days earlier, the mansion still breathed in rhythm with wealth. Polished floors, muted jazz, the scent of lilies waiting to be placed in crystal. Outside, autumn mist rolled across Beacon Hill, wrapping privilege in quiet fog. Daniel's car idled at the gate. Inside, he rehearsed softness, not authority. A husband's surprise, not a CEO's directive. Upstairs, clocks chimed in synchronized luxury. Behind one of those walls, something small trembled. The future scandal, the public disgrace, none of it existed yet. Only routine, silence, and the illusion of safety. As the gate opened and the car eased toward the driveway, light spilled from tall windows like gold poured over marble. Somewhere inside, a housekeeper wiped fingerprints from silver and prayed her employer wouldn't come home early. The clock's minute hand crawled toward revelation. Sunlight crept through beveled glass, casting honeyed stripes across the mansion's corridor. Elena Cruz moved quietly, her reflection stretching over polished floors, as if duty itself had form. Every step carried practiced restraint, the grace of invisibility demanded by old money. From the drawing room came faint laughter, brittle and rehearsed. The children's voices, small echoes within cathedral ceilings, didn't sound like play, they sounded choreographed. Elena paused, cloth in hand, and listened. A sharp word sliced through the air, followed by silence too heavy for mourning. She tightened her grip on the rag, breath held, before returning to polish the family silver, the trophies of success that never tarnished, even when souls did. Outside, the fountain murmured over smooth stone. Inside, the house exhaled wealth and something darker beneath it. She knew the rhythm by heart. Calm surface, cruelty timed to the ticking of antique clocks.
Daniel's sedan rode through the gate like a confession he hadn't yet made. The back seat held a bouquet wrapped in white paper, lilies arranged with obsessive precision. They were her favorite, or so he believed. For years, gestures had replaced intimacy. Flowers instead of words, gifts instead of presents. Today felt different. He had promised himself a softer approach, a reminder that beneath the billionaire existed a husband. The city hummed below, unaware of the small redemption he hoped to deliver. As the mansion's facade rose before him, windows glinting like watchful eyes, doubt flickered. He stepped out, shoes striking marble, and adjusted his tie. The bouquet brushed against his cufflinks, scattering faint pollen. In the golden reflection of the front doors, he saw both versions of himself, the provider and the absent father, converging toward the same threshold, carrying flowers that would soon witness horror. Inside, the corridor glowed as if sunlight obeyed wealth. Chandeliers dripped warm gold, pooling over art and silence. Daniel's footsteps echoed gently, anticipation steadying his breath. From the side hallway, a figure stumbled forward. Elena, the housekeeper, eyes wide, face drained of color. Her hands trembled so violently that her keys chimed like wind bells. Before he could speak, she pressed her palm toward him, urgency carving lines across her features. Her whisper wasn't heard, but felt, a warning vibrating through air itself. Instinct halted him mid-step. Behind the nearest door, faint murmurs twisted into the crackling tone of authority. The house, once serene, now breathed like something cornered. Elena's eyes flicked toward the source of the sound, then back to him, pleading without words. Daniel's heart slowed to a drumbeat of dread. The lilies drooped against his wrist as if they sensed they'd entered the wrong story.
He shifted toward the doorway, guided by disbelief more than courage. The gap between frame and hinge revealed a tableau painted in cruelty. 3 children knelt on the carpet, backs rigid, eyes fixed on open books trembling in their hands. Across from them sat Vanessa Drake, the woman society praised for compassion, her posture immaculate, her face lit by the blue glow of a phone. Each syllable from her mouth landed like commandment. The children's lips moved soundlessly, mimicking obedience learned through fear. Daniel's grip on the bouquet loosened. Petals fell silently to the floor. This couldn't belong to his home, to his wife, to his life curated for perfection. Yet the evidence unfolded meters away, framed by the symmetry of wealth. He drew back, breath shallow, realizing that the silence he'd admired in this house had never been peace, it had been suppression. Time constricted.
Daniel stood motionless, every instinct warring against exposure. The lilies slipped from his grasp, scattering across the marble like fragments of apology. Each heartbeat thudded against his ribs, echoing the metronome inside the room where cruelty ticked in rhythm. He could barely see past the wall, yet he saw enough. The tremor of a child's shoulder, the shadow of a woman who owned every second of their fear. The air thickened, until breathing felt like betrayal. Guilt burned through his chest, months of absences, board meetings, and blind trust condensed into a single realization. He had built an empire, but not a refuge. Elena's hand gripped his sleeve, anchoring him in secrecy. He remained still, a statue carved from disbelief. The flowers lay crushed underfoot, their scent rising sweet and wrong. Above it all, the mansion hummed, unaware its master had finally seen its truth.
Elena's breath came in shallow tremors. Years of servitude had trained her to hide emotion, yet now fear cracked her composure. She leaned close enough for Daniel to sense the tremor in her hand, the scent of metal from keys gripped too tight. Behind the door, Vanessa's tone sharpened again, measured cruelty dressed as discipline. Elena's whisper grazed the air like confession. "She changes when you're gone." The words barely formed before she withdrew, scanning the corridor as though the walls themselves listened. Daniel's pulse hammered. In his world, numbers and contracts defined truth. Here, intuition screamed louder. Elena pointed toward a vent where sound slipped through, a conduit of proof no camera had captured. The house wasn't silent, it was full of swallowed cries. As realization spread, he understood that returning early had never been accident. Fate had staged his arrival for exposure. Later that night, Elena's courage found shape in technology. In a dim laundry room lined with starch and silence, she produced her hidden phone. The screen glowed pale against her trembling fingers. With a tap, the house came alive again. Vanessa's voice ordering obedience, a child's muffled sob, the slap of a book hitting carpet. The audio filled the sterile air, transforming duty into witness. Daniel listened, disbelief tightening into fury. Each second of the recording pressed weight onto his chest. This wasn't a single act, it was ritualized dominance. He imagined all the nights he'd been away, dinner galas masking horror beneath their sparkle. The phone slipped slightly in his grasp, slick with sweat. Proof pulsed through cheap circuitry, a digital heartbeat of truth. Outside the window, Boston's skyline glittered with indifferent lights, while inside, a man began to understand that wealth couldn't silence evil built within its walls.
When dawn crawled over the city, denial wrapped itself around Daniel like armor. He dressed for work, tie precise, expression rehearsed, rituals meant to contain chaos. The mansion's corridors gleamed again, erasing the shadows of the night before. He convinced himself it had been misinterpretation, stress, perhaps staged resentment from a disgruntled employee. Vanessa greeted him with morning elegance, porcelain coffee cup balanced effortlessly. Nothing in her smile hinted at cruelty. For a fragile moment, illusion won. Yet behind that smile he noticed rhythm, an echo of the metronome from last night. The pattern gnawed at certainty. He kissed her cheek out of habit and tasted cold perfume layered over something acrid, control. By the time he reached his car, the bouquet from yesterday had withered in the trash bin. The scent of decay followed him, whispering that denial was the final luxury he could no longer afford. 2 days before exposure, the ballroom glistened under rehearsal lights. Vanessa stood center stage, her reflection multiplied in mirrored walls. Assistants adjusted microphones while she practiced her speech about empathy, community, compassion. Each phrase rolled smooth, honed through years of image management. Cameras tested angles, catching the flawless drape of her gown, the benevolent tilt of her head. Nearby, Daniel watched, half proud, half detached. The applause she simulated echoed hollow through the empty hall. He had once admired that control, the precision of her presence, the way she bent perception to her will. Now, memory painted it differently. Every smile rehearsed, every pause calculated. When she ended her practice with practiced tears and perfect posture, technicians applauded politely. Daniel clapped too, unaware that in 48 hours, this same stage would become her ruin.
The lights dimmed, the illusion held. Fragile glass waiting for the first fracture.
Back at the mansion, silence had become rule. The children's room sat immaculate, beds perfectly made, books aligned by color, air devoid of warmth. Caleb, Owen, and Lily communicated in glances, learning that quiet was safer than truth. Mealtimes passed like ceremonies of fear, forks placed precisely, bites measured, no laughter permitted. Cameras hidden in chandeliers blinked red, Vanessa's surveillance disguised as modern security. When Daniel's voice echoed through the intercom from his office downtown, their shoulders straightened instinctively. "Everything fine?" he'd ask, unaware of 3 silent nods framed just outside camera range. Behind them, the metronome ticked from the piano room, a pulse marking obedience. Each click erased another fragment of childhood. By night, Caleb drew maps of escape routes on notebook paper, while Lily clutched a wilted lily petal, proof of gentleness in a house that worshipped control. Fear became their common language. Morning sunlight refracted off steel and glass as Daniel entered the boardroom perched above Boston. Gregory Vale, his CFO and Vanessa's quiet ally, greeted him with sympathetic precision. Concerns filled the agenda, whispers about family matters affecting investor confidence. Screens projected stock graphs climbing, yet eyes focused on gossip. Daniel sat in his leather chair feeling suddenly exposed, the humiliation of his private house creeping into corporate air. Vale suggested a sabbatical, a period of reflection. Around the table, polite nods masqueraded as support, while curiosity burned behind them. He realized how quickly power shifted once scent of weakness spread. The empire he built from certainty now vibrated with speculation. Outside, a gull screeched against the window, raw, unfiltered sound against a sealed world. He left the meeting numb, understanding that Vanessa's control stretched far beyond walls of home. It had infiltrated the bloodstream of his legacy.
That afternoon, Vanessa met Vale in a cafe designed for discretion. Tinted glass, sound-absorbing walls, espresso served with subtle judgment. Her demeanor was polished grief, a wife concerned for her husband's declining stability. She spoke of Daniel's sleepless nights, erratic behavior, imaginary accusations against loyal staff. Vale listened, recording nothing, yet absorbing everything. Every phrase seeded doubt that would later blossom into corporate revolt. Vanessa's eyes shimmered under soft light, an actress delivering the performance of a lifetime. She knew perception was currency, and she spent it lavishly. By the time she rose to leave, Vale's sympathy had turned to alliance. Across town, Daniel reviewed quarterly reports, unaware his credibility was being dismantled sip by sip. When Vanessa stepped back into the limousine, she smiled faintly. The empire would crumble not through scandal, but through whispers, her favorite form of destruction. Night descended over glass towers, reflecting a man haunted by absence. Daniel sat before the skyline, watching his reflection overlap the city he'd conquered. Images flashed uninvited, birthdays missed, drawings unanswered, dinners replaced by board calls. Each success now looked like neglect wearing a medal. On his desk lay the recording Elena had given him, the screen black yet heavy as conscience. He pressed play again, forcing himself to listen without retreat. The children's restrained sobs filled the penthouse office, merging with the hum of city power lines. His fortune no longer sounded triumphant, it hissed with guilt. He imagined walking through the golden corridor again, lilies rotting where they'd fallen. Every tick of the clock reminded him that silence wasn't innocence, it was participation. He turned off the lights, letting darkness mirror what he'd ignored for years. Success built upon unattended cries.
Rain threaded down the conservatory glass as Elena finally broke. Her voice quivered less from fear than exhaustion. She spoke of countless nights when Vanessa's footsteps signaled dread, of meals denied, of Lily's small hands trembling under forced recitations. Each word peeled another layer of pretense from Daniel's world.
He listened, unmoving, while stormlight fractured across marble floors. Elena described her attempts to intervene, letters unsent, calls deleted, courage suffocated by threats of dismissal. Yet guilt had eroded obedience. She'd begun recording weeks ago, hoping evidence might matter someday. Daniel realized the courage it took to betray silence in a house built on secrecy. Outside, thunder rolled over the Charles River. Inside, confession rewrote loyalty. Elena wasn't merely a servant. She was witness, protector, and the only adult who'd seen truth without flinching. Her trembling ended with a whisper of resolve. The storm finally had allies. The knock came at dusk, 3 measured raps echoing through marble stillness. Through the peephole, a pair of government badges gleamed, Child Protective Services. The accusation struck faster than comprehension. Vanessa appeared instantly, silk robe immaculate, concern rehearsed. Behind her calm eyes, satisfaction glimmered. Elena stood frozen near the stairwell, understanding before anyone spoke. An anonymous report claimed neglect, aggression, emotional harm against the housekeeper. Officers stepped inside, clipboards poised. Daniel's protest tangled with confusion. Vanessa's composure reigned supreme. The children peered from the landing, faces white with terror. For a moment, truth inverted, virtue labeled guilty, cruelty cloaked as care. Papers rustled like verdicts, pens scratched destinies. Elena's shoulders sagged as one officer guided her toward questioning. Daniel felt the floor tilt beneath him. The house, once silent, now murmured betrayal. Somewhere unseen, Vanessa smiled, having turned justice itself into another weapon of control.
The officers entered the drawing room, greeted by the fragrance of orchids and the illusion of calm. Vanessa's eyes shimmered with crafted worry as she recounted a story of loyalty gone wrong. An unstable employee, overwhelmed by grief for her dead husband, losing boundaries with the children. Her gestures were gentle, her tone maternal. Every syllable wrapped deceit in empathy. Daniel stood beside her, trapped in a disorienting tableau, authority nodding while truth bled unseen. One officer scribbled notes, the other scanned the spotless space that revealed nothing of fear. Vanessa guided them with charm, offering tea, sympathy, and falsified concern. When Elena tried to speak, Vanessa's hand brushed her arm lightly, a warning disguised as comfort. The interview ended with polite assurances and quiet suspicion directed the wrong way. As the door closed behind them, Vanessa's smile lingered like perfume, sweet, poisonous, impossible to prove. The following morning, Elena was summoned to the servants' entrance, where 2 officials waited with forms and questions sharp as scalpels. They called it protocol. She called it punishment. Her apron was still damp from cleaning, but they treated it as disguise. Each inquiry assumed guilt, every glance implied deceit. Behind them, Vanessa watched from the staircase, wrapped in silken victory. The children stood hidden on the landing, small faces pressed to railings, learning how the innocent are made to bow. When the car door shut, Elena's reflection flashed briefly in its window. Tear-streaked, defiant and alone. The mansion's grandeur mocked her departure, marble swallowing the sound of retreating footsteps. Upstairs, Daniel remained silent, wrestling with disbelief and shame. The house had performed its ritual perfectly. Punishment without evidence, order without mercy.
The mansion felt whiter without Elena, every polished surface reflecting doubt. Daniel wandered through rooms that no longer felt like his, searching for logic that would absolve him of inaction. Vanessa floated nearby, her movements deliberate, her sympathy suffocating. She poured coffee, offered comfort, murmured reassurances that his trust had been betrayed by the help. Her composure disoriented him. Guilt disguised itself as reason. Maybe he had misread everything. Maybe Elena had indeed crossed lines. But then a faint echo drifted from the children's corridor, the click of that cursed metronome. The rhythm froze him mid-thought. Denial fractured, exposing memory. Lily's trembling shoulders, Owen's hollow stare, Caleb's forced obedience. He set the coffee aside, untouched. Vanessa's reflection lingered in the mirror behind him, a perfect image of control. He realized he had become a spectator in his own home, applauding the woman who rewrote his reality. Upstairs, the children moved like ghosts, rehearsing survival. Words had become dangerous currency, traded only in whispers behind closed doors. Caleb traced invisible circles on the carpet where Alana used to kneel with them to read. Owen avoided mirrors, afraid they might show the truth his father refused to see. Lily kept a folded paper lily under her pillow, its edges soft from clutching. Vanessa's rules multiplied. No laughter after sunset, no questions at meals, no unsupervised reading. Their lives shrank to the size of obedience. When footsteps approached, breath stopped. Even their toys seemed complicit, arranged in perfect lines. The house pulsed with silence, an organism feeding on fear. In that stillness they learned endurance, the art of invisibility. Yet deep within Caleb's eyes, defiance flickered faintly, a hidden pilot light, waiting for air. Somewhere far below, a father finally began to sense the smoke.
Sleep refused Daniel. The mansion's security system glowed across monitors in his office, streams of sterile footage looping perfection. He inserted Elena's phone into his laptop, replaying the recording yet again. Each repetition tore fresh wounds. The children's small voices, Vanessa's cutting commands, the thud of punishment, unmistakable truth that technology could no longer protect him from. He paused on a frame, Lily flinching at a shadow. The timestamp matched a night he'd been addressing investors in New York. Shame crawled up his throat. He minimized the file, but the sound lingered in memory, refusing erasure. Through the window, Beacon Hill glittered coldly, wealth sleeping peacefully, while his own house drowned in fear. For the first time, he wished the walls would speak louder than the numbers in his accounts. The city's clock tower struck midnight, and the man who measured life by profit began measuring loss instead. Morning arrived with a vibration on Daniel's phone, an encrypted message from his attorney, Priya Shah. No greeting, only the subject line, "Metadata doesn't lie." Attached were analysis files showing that the recording Elena had provided hadn't been tampered with, timestamps aligned precisely with nights he'd been away. Another document traced the CPS report's origin, Vanessa's personal laptop, IP verified. The revelation detonated quietly inside him, more devastating than any public accusation. Betrayal had become mathematical, documented in digital forensics. He scrolled through the data again, fingers trembling. The evidence turned emotion into fact, and fact into duty. Downstairs, Vanessa's laughter floated through the hallway, melodic and false. He closed the laptop softly, as if not to wake a sleeping monster. Outside, the morning sun cut sharp through mist, illuminating dust motes that hung suspended, proof of movement even when everything seemed still.
The truth no longer hid in rumor. It lived in binary code and video proof. Daniel stared at the monitor until his reflection blurred with Vanessa's cruelty looping behind it. Every instinct urged confrontation, yet strategy whispered caution. She had built an image fortified by charity, influence, and law. He needed precision, not rage. Still, emotion surged, years of partnership reduced to manipulation. He paced to study, floor creaking under deliberate steps, rehearsing how to dismantle deception without destroying the children further. He knew exposure would scorch everyone. Innocence would not escape unscarred, yet inaction had already cost them their peace. The decision crystallized with brutal clarity. He would let Vanessa's empire consume itself. The gala 2 nights away offered stage, audience, and spotlight. Justice would arrive disguised as celebration. For the first time, Daniel felt something colder than grief, resolve sharpened to a blade. That evening, the city convulsed under a nor'easter. Rain lashed against windows, blurring Beacon Hill into streaks of silver.
Inside, Daniel sat alone, watching lightning flare across portraits of ancestors who had built legacies through reputation, not morality. Thunder rolled through the mansion like judgment delayed. Vanessa moved upstairs, her heels clicking a metronome of arrogance. Every flash illuminated fragments of the life he had curated: awards, photographs, polished lies. On the desk lay the USB drive containing the recording, its metal surface catching blue light. The storm's rhythm matched his heartbeat. For years he had measured success in predictable cycles: markets, quarters, dividends. Now he learned the cadence of consequence. Outside, branches whipped like lashes against glass. Inside, he whispered a silent vow that by dawn the house would begin to change, even if it meant burning in the process.
Memory struck mid-storm. A lawyer sliding papers across mahogany, Vanessa signing with perfect poise. The prenuptial clause, benevolent in language, brutal in effect, granted her control of a charitable trust if guardianship of the children shifted to an academy for their well-being. He'd dismissed it then, blinded by charm. Now the puzzle fit cruelly. Every act of discipline, every fabricated report, every manipulation aimed toward that signature's promise. Daniel saw it unfold backward: her patience, her philanthropy, her relentless image cultivation. Nothing had been impulsive, it was enterprise. Lightning illuminated the document locked in his safe, ink still binding his fate to her ambition. He realized she hadn't married him for love or status alone, but for institutional power, the inheritance of his name. The discovery didn't wound, it clarified. The enemy wasn't madness, it was strategy perfected through elegance. When dawn bled through thinning clouds, Daniel stood at his office window, watching steam rise from wet streets. Exhaustion had scoured fear from him, leaving purpose distilled. The USB drive rested in his palm, small, unremarkable, lethal. He rehearsed his next 48 hours with the precision of a corporate takeover. The gala schedule, the press presence, the AV technician's access point. Justice would be delivered not in secrecy, but under chandeliers. Vanessa believed she ruled perception. He would let perception devour her. Downstairs, the children stirred, their footsteps timid but real. He heard their quiet movement and felt the faint surge of something almost forgotten: fatherhood awakening as weapon and shield. The rain eased into mist. Daniel placed the USB inside his breast pocket, where his heart beat steady behind it. For the first time in years, his pulse and purpose moved in unison toward reckoning.
Sunlight returned, deceptive and soft. The mansion awoke under Vanessa's orchestration. Violins through hidden speakers, coffee scents, children costumed in politeness. Donors would arrive for a brunch before the evening gala. Caleb balanced trays. Owen folded napkins with surgical precision. Lily moved silently, eyes fixed on the floor. Vanessa drifted among them, immaculate in ivory silk, every command wrapped in praise. Cameras waited to capture generosity, not domination. Daniel watched from the threshold, memorizing the contradiction: public grace over private ruin. Each flash of a photographer's lens immortalized the lie he was about to detonate. The children's small gestures carried secret understanding. They knew the storm was near. Beneath porcelain civility, tension hummed. Vanessa raised her glass, toasting perfection. Daniel almost smiled. He had learned the language of appearances, and today he would weaponize it. The stage was ready. The goddess of composure stood in her own trap. While champagne laughter rippled through marble halls, a knock slid beneath the sound. 3 soft taps at the service door. Elena stood there, rain-damp, bruised by humiliation, yet unbroken. Her eyes met Daniel's, no words exchanged, only mission. Hidden in her coat pocket lay a USB duplicate of the recording, insurance against deletion. Daniel ushered her through back corridors thick with perfume and hypocrisy. In the kitchen, she exhaled years of fear. He told her the plan with a single nod. She understood the danger without explanation. Upstairs, Vanessa's laughter filtered down. melodic and oblivious. Elena placed the device on the counter between them like contraband truth. It gleamed under sterile light, small as a seed yet heavy with consequence. When she left again, the scent of detergent followed, a quiet reminder that courage often smells like work. The mansion's symmetry held, unaware its foundation had shifted.
That night, Daniel sat before the home security array, the empire of cameras he once trusted for safety. Each monitor flickered with sterile calm, corridors empty, bedrooms neat, behavior rehearsed. But one feed, forgotten among dozens, caught motion. A reflection, a hand raised mid-command. He rewound, slowed, enhanced. Vanessa's figure loomed over Owen, her face contorted, voice inaudible through distance. Daniel isolated the clip, rerouted audio through the system's hidden channel, and heard the truth raw. Threats, mockery, the metallic slam of fear. The house's technology, built for control, now betrayed its master. He watched in silence, feeling his pulse synchronize with each captured heartbeat of cruelty. There would be no more denial, no more trust. When the playback ended, he exported the file and locked the folder under a single name: Judgment. Outside, Beacon Hill's streetlights shimmered like witnesses too polite to intervene. Midnight stretched thin as wire. Daniel hunched over the monitor, watching Vanessa shove Owen's shoulder, hiss something sharp, then glance toward the camera, oblivious to its eye. The sound of Lily's restrained sobs sliced the silence. This was no isolated cruelty. It was habit performed with artistry. He captured still frames, timestamps, the angle of her disdain. Proof assembled itself line by line, as precise as any quarterly report. Yet each saved file felt like a wound reopened. He paused the recording on Vanessa's expression, calm satisfaction after fear was inflicted. That serenity, not anger, defined her evil. He shut the laptop, unable to watch further. The room smelled of ozone from overheated circuits. On the desk lay the gala invitation, embossed and flawless. Tomorrow, it would host masks of benevolence, and Daniel intended to rip everyone away. Truth was no longer secret. It was loaded ammunition.
Alone in his study, Daniel's composure collapsed. Rage and shame collided, leaving exhaustion's residue. He stared at the portrait of his late wife, the woman whose death had opened space for Vanessa's entrance. Guilt clawed through him, the trust he'd misplaced, the innocence he'd ignored. He struck the desk once, the sound echoing through polished emptiness. The impact spilled the decanter. Amber liquid streamed like spilled time. He sank into the chair, head in hands, mind replaying every moment he'd called discipline what was actually domination. For the first time, tears carved through a face trained never to yield. The storm outside had passed, but inside, thunder persisted, quieter and crueler. When he finally looked up, dawn hinted pale behind curtains. The USB drive glimmered near the spill, untouched by the mess. It seemed to wait patiently, a silent witness asking only to be heard. Later that morning, Daniel met Priya Shah in a corner office overlooking Gray Harbor water. The lawyer's calm cut through his turmoil. She listened, absorbed evidence, and mapped a route of exposure precise as litigation. One broadcast, she said, voice steady. One irrefutable moment. Let her condemn herself. Daniel nodded, understanding risk, defamation suits, board fallout, public spectacle. But silence was no longer protection, it was complicity. Priya's outline unfolded like strategy for war, timing, redundancy, encrypted uploads, legal buffer. He felt strangely centered amid her precision. Justice would arrive not as chaos, but choreography. As they parted, Priya handed him a sealed envelope labeled Plan B, if she survives this. He didn't ask what it contained. Outside, gulls circled the waterfront, scavengers waiting for whatever truth washed ashore. For the first time in months, Daniel felt the faint electricity of control returning to his pulse.
Evening descended warm and dissective. Elena returned once more, slipping through the service entrance, eyes shadowed by fatigue. She had heard of the planned reveal, and fear coiled through her courage. In the quiet pantry, she begged Daniel to reconsider. Justice was necessary, but the children had already endured enough spectacle. Public ruin might wound them deeper than secrecy ever did. Her voice trembled with compassion. Her strength was mercy, not revenge. Daniel listened, every instinct torn. She reminded him that vengeance seldom ends at victory. Still, he knew there would be no true safety while Vanessa's mask remained intact. Elena pressed her palms together, whispering one final request: spare the children from witnessing their mother's collapse. He promised nothing, only met her gaze with heavy resolve. In her eyes, he saw exhaustion, hope, and a flicker of faith that he would choose truth without cruelty. Night folded over the mansion, bringing the quiet before collision. Daniel stood in his dressing room, staring at tuxedos identical as lies. He selected one like armor, sliding the USB into its hidden inner pocket. In the mirror, his reflection no longer looked powerful, only deliberate. Elena's plea echoed, but the decision had hardened. Protecting the children required destruction, not concealment. Downstairs, Vanessa rehearsed her acceptance speech, each syllable dripping virtue. The sound traveled through vents, blending with distant city horns. Daniel's heartbeat synchronized with the metronome, once used to terrify. He let it drive him now. For years, he'd avoided confrontation, mistaking peace for safety. Tonight, avoidance would die. He extinguished every light except one. The lamp over the desk where the bouquet of lilies had dried to brittle ghosts. Their silence seemed to nod approval as he left to orchestrate the reckoning.
In a private control booth inside the gala venue, Daniel met the AV technician Priya had arranged. The hall buzzed beyond, guests unaware of the coming inversion. On a monitor, the schedule ticked toward Vanessa's speech. He inserted the USB into the system's port, dragging the cursed file into the playback queue. Countdown initiated. 6 minutes until exposure. The technician verified the loop, oblivious to the moral gravity resting on a progress bar. Daniel's pulse aligned with the digital timer. He imagined the children asleep, Elena pacing, Boston skyline blinking like warning lights. One final click sealed fate. The room's air conditioning hummed. Champagne laughter seeped faintly through insulated glass. Justice, he realized, was not loud at first. It was procedural, mechanical, inevitable. He straightened his cuffs, exhaled once, and stepped toward the ballroom where redemption would masquerade as disaster. Across town, Vanessa adjusted her diamond earrings before a mirror framed in gold. The reflection adored her. Makeup flawless, speech memorized, she rehearsed gratitude for causes she'd exploited. Assistants fluttered around, oblivious to the storm coded into that USB, now ticking toward exposure. She mistook composure for invincibility, believing charm could neutralize any threat. Her gown, white as absolution, concealed the darkness she cultivated. Cameras would adore her tonight. Applause would crown her again. Yet beneath perfection, a faint static of unease pricked her composure, the intuition predators feel before the trap. She dismissed it, stepped into her limousine, and watched city lights slide across tinted glass like applause already earned. Outside, rain began again, thin and whispering. Inside, Vanessa smiled, unaware that every flash of lightning along the skyline wasn't weather, it was countdown. The ballroom posed with flashbulbs and polished ego. Journalists lined the red carpet, their questions sugar-coated with flattery. Limousines spilled elegance onto marble steps, sequins winking beneath chandeliers. Vanessa Drake emerged last, haloed by camera light, her ivory gown absorbing attention as naturally as breath. Every movement rehearsed charm, every smile concealed empire. Reporters shouted praise, not questions. She waved, pausing for the perfect photo, philanthropy incarnate. Inside, a banner stretched above crystal doors, an evening of compassion. Daniel waited beyond it, already inside, unseen, his expression carved from granite. Music swelled, strings smooth as deception.
To strangers, the couple would appear flawless when they met. Beneath the orchestra's glide, however, two storms converged, hers powered by arrogance, his by purpose. When the doors closed behind her and applause enveloped her arrival, the stage lights hummed toward revelation. Tonight, reputation would become execution. Minutes later, Daniel slipped through a service corridor, bypassing the velvet spectacle. No flashbulbs, no greetings. The tuxedo fitted him like shadow, anonymity tailored to precision. Security guards nodded, unaware of the weight in his pocket. In the mirror-lined hallway leading to the ballroom, he glimpsed his reflection multiplied. 60 Daniels walking toward judgment. The hum of conversation deepened, muffled through walls. Laughter trembled above the bass line of violins. He felt the cool press of the USB against his chest, heartbeats syncing with the concealed countdown. For years, he'd been the man who funded appearances. Tonight, he financed truth. He entered through a side door as the MC announced his name, applause sparking like electricity. Cameras panned, catching the reunion of the golden couple. To the crowd, they were unity reborn. To Daniel, they were collision, disguised as grace. The predator had finally joined its prey.
The master of ceremonies raised his glass, voice booming through crystal clarity. To Vanessa Drake for redefining generosity. Applause cascaded, cameras flashed like miniature storms. Vanessa stepped onto the stage, poised beneath the spotlight's halo. She began her speech, phrases honed, cadence perfect, humanity scripted. Kindness, she said, is the currency that builds tomorrow. Her voice lilted over the audience, hypnotic and controlled. Daniel stood near the back, every syllable a needle through patience. He noted the timer on the technician's console. 3 minutes. The orchestra underscored her lies with soft strings. Guests leaned forward, devout congregants at the altar of appearance. On the large screens behind her, her portrait shimmered, a saint in sequins. She smiled into applause, unaware that her next breath would turn her sermon into evidence. Daniel's hand closed around a glass of water, steady, waiting. 2 minutes. The truth was already climbing the wires. Halfway through Vanessa's crescendo, the lights dimmed, not artfully, but with sudden violence. The microphone shrieked feedback, cutting her sentence in half. Gasps scattered. Waiters froze mid-pour. For an instant, darkness swallowed glamour. Then, emergency lights flared, crimson and raw. The orchestra faltered into silence. Vanessa blinked, confusion tightening her face. Daniel, by the sound booth, met the technician's glance and gave the smallest nod. A click. Static rolled through speakers like thunder starting underground. The screens behind Vanessa flickered. White noise, distortion, then a frozen image of her own living room. The crowd murmured, assuming a malfunction. Vanessa tried to recover, smile trembling, but the sound followed. Her voice, cold, imperious, ordering obedience. The ballroom air stiffened. Daniel felt no triumph, only gravity. The moment had arrived, irreversible. Truth, once caged, had chosen its volume.
The recording bled into clarity, children sobbing, her voice slicing commands through their cries. The speakers carried cruelty to every chandeliered corner. Laughter died. Forks clinked once, then nothing. Vanessa's own words echoed back at her, filling the hall that had celebrated compassion. Faces turned, disbelief painted in crystal reflections. On the screens, the golden corridor appeared, her hand raised, the children trembling. No editing, no denial possible. Someone gasped her name. A donor dropped his glass. Every audience member became juror and witness. Vanessa's composure cracked, a tremor twitched her smile. The audio looped her threat, "Tell him and you're gone." Whispers erupted, phones lifted, reputations live-streamed into infamy. At the back, Daniel watched still, unmoved as empathy and horror collided under chandeliers. The sound of his children's fear reverberated across applause halls, justice dressed in their mother's own voice. Shock spread like contagion. Guests half rose, torn between pity and fascination. Smartphones lit the darkness, recording every second.
Truth replicated faster than Vanessa's panic could rewrite it. Hashtags ignited before security even reacted. 1,000 lenses captured her unraveling, the flawless mask fracturing, the frantic glance toward Daniel, and the dawning realization that she was public property now. Journalists whispered into microphones. Networks switched feeds. The hall filled with mechanical chimes of notifications, the symphony of instant disgrace. Vanessa's diamond bracelet snapped as she gripped the podium too hard. Somewhere in the back, a woman cried, not for Vanessa, but for the children on the screen. The socialites who once adored her turned into spectators of downfall. Daniel felt the weight of every lens shift toward him, seeking reaction. He gave none. The punishment wasn't spectacle to him. It was accounting finely balanced.
Vanessa's scream fractured the room's stunned quiet. "Who did this?" Her voice cracked into microphone distortion, echoing monstrous through the speakers. The audience recoiled, seeing not elegance but raw fury stripped of its costume. She scanned faces, hunting betrayal. Daniel stood motionless, and when her eyes found him, silence deepened. Recognition flared, shock first, then hatred so bright it seemed to burn through mascara. She lunged toward the wings, demanding the system be shut down, but the technician froze under command he couldn't countermand. The recording looped again, her cruelty amplified until it devoured her own protest. Panic fluttered among guests, security hesitated, unsure whom to protect. In that confusion, Vanessa's rage curdled into desperation. Her hand struck the microphone stand, sending it clattering across marble, a metallic exclamation mark. The echo lingered longer than applause ever had. The goddess of compassion had become her own evidence. He turned away before the final loop ended. Cameras tracked his retreat through the aisle, capturing calm amid chaos. Each step felt heavier than victory deserved. Applause had inverted into murmurs, admiration into accusation. He passed clusters of stunned faces, their sympathy uncertain. Outside the ballroom doors, air felt real again, cold, unscented, alive. In the corridor he paused, hearing through the walls the last fragments of Vanessa's downfall echoing like a confession forced into history. He hadn't expected relief, he found emptiness instead. Justice carried no warmth, only silence where denial once lived. Reporters chased after him, flashes strobing, questions overlapping. He said nothing. The city's night air swallowed him whole. Behind him, the ballroom remained lit in feverish disbelief. Ahead, Beacon Hill glittered indifferently. Truth had been spoken aloud, but redemption, he realized, would begin only in the quiet his children still feared to trust.
By midnight, the world had opinions. News anchors dissected frames, pundits debated morality as entertainment. Beacon Hill's power couple implodes, headlines screamed. Stock tickers scrolled below images of Vanessa's contorted face, charity sponsors withdrawing in real time. Daniel watched from a cab window, city lights flickering over exhaustion. Every ping of his phone announced new humiliation, articles questioning his blindness, experts speculating about corporate fallout. Justice had gone viral, mercy had no followers. He scrolled past messages from Priya, from board members, from strangers demanding statements. None received replies. Across screens, Vanessa's name eclipsed his own, but scandal shared authorship. He closed the phone, leaned back, and let the noise blur. Outside, Boston rolled by, rain-slick streets reflecting red and blue from distant sirens. The empire would survive, reputation might not. Truth, once unleashed, never returned to captivity. It wandered headlines, feral and ungoverned. At the mansion, television screens glowed faintly through the night. Caleb, Owen, and Lily sat huddled on the couch, faces pale in the blue light. The broadcast replayed fragments of the gala, their mother's voice echoing through applause, their father's silent departure. Confusion tangled with relief. Justice looked nothing like comfort. The nanny tried to turn off the TV, but Caleb stopped her with a shake of the head. He needed to see that truth had finally spoken aloud. Owen hid his face, unable to watch his fear made public. Lily clutched her paper flower, whispering nothing. When the broadcast ended, the house felt quiet, heavy, but breathable. For the first time, no one listened for footsteps above. Outside, dawn's first light brushed the corridor where lilies once withered. Inside, 3 children understood that safety could sound like silence, and silence, finally, belonged to them.
Morning seeped through the mansion like anesthesia. Reporters lingered at the gate, their lenses searching for wreckage. Inside, Daniel wandered through rooms stripped of illusion. The grand staircase echoed with emptiness. Portraits seemed to avert their eyes. He gathered the remnants of deception: a cracked phone, a broken metronome, a wine glass rimmed with lipstick. Every object testified to years of blindness. Upstairs, the children slept at last, exhaustion replacing fear. The corridor smelled of dust, not perfume. For the first time, he noticed the sound of wind through half-opened windows, an intrusion once forbidden. Vanessa's presence had evaporated, leaving a house echoing its own guilt. He paused at the threshold of the children's room, realizing that rebuilding would require more than apology. It would require time without masks. Truth had burned the rot away, but its smoke still clung to every wall. By afternoon, the city turned its gaze on him. News crews lined courthouse steps. Shareholders demanded statements. He faced microphones with deliberate stillness, neither defending nor condemning himself. "I failed to see," was all he offered. The admission replayed across networks, dissected by analysts who mistook remorse for strategy. Behind glass walls of conference rooms, board members debated leadership. Behind closed doors, strangers debated fatherhood. Daniel returned each night to his children, bearing headlines like thorns. The humiliation became his penance, a public crucible purging privilege through scrutiny. In the markets, his company wavered but did not fall. In whispers, he became a paradox, the billionaire who exposed his own wife to save his children. Beneath the noise, he found clarity. Reputation had been currency. Now, truth was. Every question from the press reminded him that silence once protected evil, and speech, however painful, was salvation.
Weeks later, Elena sat before a panel of investigators, posture straight, voice unwavering. The same officials who once doubted her now listened intently, pens motionless. She recounted details without embellishment: the locked doors, the withheld meals, the fear etched into small faces. Her words carried quiet power, unadorned and devastating. Daniel watched from the gallery, pride threaded through remorse. When asked why she hadn't left sooner, she answered simply, because they needed someone to stay. The room fell silent. Truth had no theatrics. It only required courage to breathe. Outside, journalists waited for statements, but Elena walked past them untouched, her dignity untarnished by exposure. For the first time, she felt weight lift from her chest, the burden of seeing without being believed. Justice hadn't come easily, but it had come honestly. The woman once invisible had become the story's spine, the witness that turned survival into proof. The courtroom smelled of paper and nerves. Caleb sat rigid beside his father, eyes flicking to the door where Vanessa would enter. When she appeared, her once regal posture drooped under scrutiny. The judge reviewed footage, transcripts, testimonies, a mosaic of ruin. Lily clutched Daniel's sleeve, trembling as gavel taps echoed like ghosts of metronomes past. When asked to speak, Caleb rose, voice shaking yet steady enough to pierce the hush. He described fear in simple words, childhood vocabulary heavy with truth. Owen added only silence, tears tracing certainty. The judge paused, humanity breaching procedure. Decision delivered. Guardianship with Daniel Whitaker, full and permanent. Vanessa stared forward, face drained of power, lips pressed thin. As the verdict settled, Daniel exhaled a breath that had lasted months. The children clung to him,
small anchors pulling him back to life. Outside, cameras flashed, but this victory was meant for none of them.
The gavel's final strike echoed longer than applause ever could. Papers shuffled, murmurs resumed. The Daniel heard nothing except Lily's soft sobs against his chest. The judge's voice softened, warning that healing would take time, that love must replace law. Daniel nodded, unable to speak. Vanessa was escorted out, heels silent on the polished floor. Her reflection slid across glass doors, vanishing into daylight that no longer obeyed her. Reporters swarmed the hallway, yet Daniel walked through them like smoke. Every flash felt muted, every question irrelevant. He had gained custody, but what mattered lay far from courts or headlines. It waited at home, drawing crayon suns on walls once forbidding. For the first time since the scandal began, Daniel smiled without calculation. Justice had spoken, but peace would require daily repetition, softer than judgment, slower than fame. Outside the courthouse, flashes burned white across gray sky. Vanessa faced them with the composure of someone too numb for pretense. Cameras devoured her dissent, the tarnished goddess reduced to tabloid prey. She climbed into a black sedan without glance or farewell. As the door shut, a swarm of reporters surrounded the car, shouting names, verdicts, accusations. The engine roared, pulling her from the city she once ruled through charm and deceit. Behind tinted glass, tears streaked makeup into anonymity. She watched banners roll by, her own charities now rebranded, her portraits replaced. In that reflection, she saw not villainy or victimhood, but emptiness. The void left when power loses audience. The sedan turned a corner and disappeared into traffic. The world moved on, already hungry for new spectacle. For Vanessa Drake, silence had finally arrived. Not as punishment, but as oblivion.
Evening returned the mansion to its quiet skeleton. The golden corridor, one stage for cruelty, glowed softly under amber lamps. No commands echoed, no footsteps pressed fear into marble. Daniel walked its length slowly, fingertips trailing the wall where he'd once hidden, watching his children's pain. Now the silence carried different weight, memory rather than menace. The lilies he'd planted in new vases released faint sweetness. He stopped midway, listening to the hum of distant laughter from upstairs. The house still bore scars, but they breathed now. Light touched portraits differently, turning opulence into background rather than prison. He realized peace didn't erase what had happened, it coexisted with it. Each reflection along the corridor showed the same man, haunted yet awake, humbled yet whole. The house had witnessed cruelty, exposure, redemption. Tonight it witnessed stillness, and that was enough. Healing crept quietly, day by day. Breakfast returned to chaos, spilled milk, uneven laughter, sunlight on unpolished silver. Caleb learned to tease again. Owen began drawing superheroes instead of escape maps. Lily sang off-key in corridors that once devoured sound. Nightmares still visited, but now they ended with Daniel's arms around them instead of silence. Elena moved through rooms like warmth itself, her voice steadying the rhythm of home. Therapy appointments replaced charity galas. Saturday mornings smelled of pancakes instead of perfume. Sometimes Daniel caught himself flinching at sudden noises, remembering the old house's tyranny, but each time a child's laugh anchored him back. The mansion no longer performed perfection, it lived imperfection with grace. And slowly fear retreated to the corners where dust collects, harmless and fading. Every unguarded smile became proof that survival could bloom in the same soil as pain.
Months later, Daniel arrived at Elena's modest apartment overlooking a narrow street lined with autumn trees. He carried a simple bouquet of lilies, white, fresh, unwrapped. The air smelled of cinnamon and detergent, a contrast to the sterile wealth he'd left behind. Inside, laughter drifted from her kitchen. The children sat on her floor drawing. For the first time, they looked entirely at ease. Daniel placed the flowers on her counter.
"They belong here," he said softly. She nodded, understanding more than words conveyed. The lilies, once witnesses to secrecy, now marked gratitude. He stayed for dinner, seated among crayons and chipped plates, listening to the symphony of normal life. When he left, the city's chill felt lighter. Through her window, he saw silhouettes against warm light, an image of family without title. The world called him billionaire again. He preferred something smaller. Father. Forgiven. Night settled over Boston, windows flickering like constellations. Daniel stood before the mansion's largest window, watching his children play in reflected glow. Their laughter rose through the halls once ruled by command. He traced the glass with a fingertip, feeling both distance and belonging. The lilies on the table caught lamplight, their scent mingling with crayons and cocoa. Outside, the city pulsed with ambition. Inside, time finally slowed. He understood now that wealth could construct walls, but never shelter love. The House of Silence had learned a new language, truth spoken in gentleness, authority reshaped as care. As he turned away, his reflection lingered beside theirs, merging father and children into one softened silhouette. In voice-over cadence, the thought settled clear and simple. Some houses are built from glass and steel. Ours was rebuilt from silence and truth.